ball into Patina Patel. Great play by Ram Casaro. It's there!
So, oh, wonderful.
North, Elding, 3-2. The FAI Cup, it's with Gavin Dykes. It's been won by Sligo Rovers.
Welcome to The Last Man Back. Today we are joined by a Sligo Rovers legend. With over 300 appearances for the club, he captained the club during the golden era in the early 90s. Some centre forwards still say they can feel him breathing down their necks. Any idea who it is? Take us back to the start of your career, Gav, as a young fella. I think it was the late 80s you joined Rovers. Were you always, through secondary school and kind of being the boy around town, was Gavin Dykes always destined to go from the role of secondary school straight into the showgrounds? Or tell us a little bit about that.
No, I wouldn't say I was always destined. Always mad to play football, always came down here as a kid and watched Rovers. Always wanted to play for them. Never thought I was quite good enough. I had a bunch of friends, we played across the road in Merville. I was mediocre, to say the least. There was a lot of talented boys in that group. Got me break, I suppose. Went to England, went to Summerhill, and David Pugh played a large part in developing me, and won a couple of college things up there. Went to England, got a bit of experience seeing what the professional game was like. Went to America after that and played out there. I was all very young at that stage. Came back, played for Strand Celtic, and got picked for international team, Noel Kennedy, and that sort of pushed me for that. And I got a phone call. Strand Celtic were playing Corinthians on a Sunday morning in the Junior League, which was a big game. Back then there was huge rivalry, and Strand's lucky enough we won that morning. And tradition as it would be, we all go back to Sunny Breeze. There was no mobile phones. I had a couple of pints after the match, and the phone rang in Sunny Breeze, and it was going for you. They want to know if you could come in and play for Rovers today. And it was funny, as we would know, Inda, who's a relation of ours, was working the Blue that night, and he was on the door, and there was a bit of a schmuffle or something, so he was injured. So he got a hiding, which means I got brought into Rovers.
Did you give him the hiding?
No, Jesus, no. And it was funny, I came down, and I remember meeting Jerry Mitchell here, and he says to me, look, he says, you'll be in the squad. And I walked into the dressing room, and there was Tom Lally, there was a whole lot of Dublin players and fellas I used to come down and watch every Sunday, and all of a sudden we were playing Cork. He named the team and I was playing right full with 2 pints on me. And Patsy Frayne, who people might know, was one of the best players ever to play for Cork City. And after 20 minutes I was absolutely dying. And I said to Patsy, I said, Jesus, look, I said, I'm dying here. I said, I had a couple of pints this morning. He says, yes, I thought I was bad. I had a lot of pints last night. So that was League of Ireland football at the time, and it sort of went from there, and probably never looked back.
I suppose we will get on to, I suppose, the evolution of your career, but is it something that you think has been taken out of the game as time has gone on? As you said there was a great social side to football when you started. I know like there's still a social side to it, but it's a lot more withdrawn now than what it was when you started. And are the players maybe not as tight-knit maybe?
I think, look, social media, as we all know, is a huge part in everything.
Yeah.
Back then we played on a Sunday at 2:30. If it was a home game, you were in, you were showered, you hope you got paid, and then if you got paid, you were out. And that was it. You went for something to eat Sunday night, you went on a few pints and you ended up in the nightclubs, and you went to work on Monday, you trained on Tuesday, and training back then on a Tuesday was just running. There was no ball to be seen. It was just running, train again on a Thursday, and it started all over again. So I think now in the modern game, that doesn't really happen. You know, it's very planned, and all the sessions are planned. everybody knows, what players do. I know players get vast amounts of money at the top end of the thing, and probably too much money, but they've no life. If they go any place, there's camera phones every place, and if anything is said or anything is done wrong, it's a big article in the newspaper. So I think football has changed, society has changed.
Do you remember your first game out there as a Sligo Rovers player?
Yeah, like I said, it was against Cork. I was playing right back, and done quite well for a fella who was under the influence of alcohol.
So that was a league game, or wasn't it?
It was a league
right,
game.
Okay.
Yeah, and I played a full game that morning for Strand Celtic at 11 o'clock and played here at half 2. I think we were beaten 2-0 at the time. We were bottom of the table, which was, I suppose, what we were at the time, and we had an awful lot of Dublin lads, some great lads. Martin Bailey was playing us at the time, and he was one of the best footballers I ever stood on the pitch with. How he was down with us, I'll never know. And we had some great characters, in the team. Like I said, there was local lads. There was John Lynch and in the Scanlon. They were there. Fago had just left, I think. So I never had the privilege of playing with him. But as it went on, you learnt more about how to protect yourself. It was a man's game back then as well. I got a couple of welcomes to the League of Ireland very, very early on,
and gave a few.
Well, you learnt how to give a few, because if you didn't, it was. I remember Paul Doolan in my second or third game we were playing Shamrock Rovers, and he absolutely hammered me with an elbow, and knocked me out. And I roomed with him and I played with him at Derry, and came back and he played for Bowes here and things like that. And it took me a long time. I think it took me 10 years before I got my own back on him, but I didn't forget. He paid for it in some way. But that was a man's game. It was hugely physical back then.
And has the game changed since then? I suppose we talked about the social side of it. So on the pitch, it's completely changed. From the days, I know the last few weeks over social media, we've seen that they've put up a couple of your famous tackles in the RDS and stuff like that. But are you happy to see the way it's changed?
Look, I said here, I was doing a game recently here in Shamrock Rovers here, and Jack Byrne was playing in the middle of the park, and he's a really talented lad. But he's a really talented lad if you let him be talented. You've got to be physical with people, and I think that side of the game has gone out. People want to, there's not enough, in my opinion, physicality. There's not enough duels on the pitch anymore. Everybody wants to play out. Everybody wants to be a centre half that can pass the ball. You don't have to pass the ball all the time. You have to head it and kick it. You have to be physical, intimidating the people. Whatever it took at the time to get an edge, you had to do that. Like I said to you, I was fairly limited. I knew I was limited, so I had to do anything I could to try and make things even up. And a great friend of mine in football once said, he might be fast, but if he's a bit of a limp, it slows him down a wee bit. So it's part and parcel of what you've done.
So if we take it back to Rovers in the early 90s, what age were you when you were made captain of Sligo Rovers, Gavin?
Trying to think. David Pugh made me captain first. It's funny, he dropped me one week and he made me captain the second week. Sort of like what Pugh used to do.
Tough love.
Yeah. Became captain then. I became real captain, I suppose, the second season that William McStay came. We were relegated the first year and went down into the first division. And I remember he called me and said, look, I want you to be captain. And it was funny, it was something I took very, very seriously. And it wasn't just on the pitch, I suppose. When I went to England and when I went to Swindon and that, Colin Calderwood, who went on to a fantastic career with Scotland and playing the World Cup afterwards, was the captain of Swindon at the time, and I was only a kid. But I watched the way he looked after the players and looked after especially some of the young players in the way. So I sort of took that, and like all the players that came to Sligo, a lot of them stayed in my house. They definitely ate in my house. It was part of what I seen as the role of being captain was, and I enjoyed it. I had to say, I think I was pretty good at it. If somebody needed to be brought in the line either on the pitch or off the pitch, I had no problem doing it. And like I said, I sort of grew into it a wee bit.
Okay, well, we all know the success that you had as a captain of Sligo Rovers, and I see a sign up there, so maybe for the 94 we'll go up and take a seat and maybe talk a bit more about that famous day in Dublin.
Yeah, no problem.
Now, 1994, probably one of the most historic years in Sligo Rovers history. And the picture of the game behind us, up in Dublin, Derry City Cup final. Can you tell us what you remember about that day, maybe from the start to finish? Maybe not the finish, but from the start anyway.
Don't remember a lot of days after. It was again. We got a bit of a lift that morning because Johnny Kenny, the PFAI was on the night before, and actually enough we couldn't go to it. But Johnny Kenny got presented with Player of the Year, First Division Player of the Year, and rightly so, that morning in the lobby. And I remember it raining, and it was raining really, really heavy, and I was delighted because it brought me back memories of, it was a good omen because Sligo the last time in Dalymount Park, and the rain that day, so we all know as well. So I was thrilled with that. Edgy, nervous. I remember getting dressed. I remember a funny incident actually. Myself and Jerry Carey, we always slagging each other that we were fat and everything else. I remember we got a scale and we were fighting over who was getting on the scale and that sort of thing. Anything sort of kill a couple of minutes because you didn't know what to do. We stayed in the hotel out in the airport, and we went up on a huge bus, 52-seater bus. The players did. The wives came along then on Francie Midland's bus, but we'd always planned we were going to Lansdowne in Francie's bus. That's where we travelled. And I tell the story. Francie Midland played a huge part. He's not in the photograph, but he played a massive part in the success we did that year as the bus driver. He was such an internal part of what we'd done, and we headed off to the game. Willie gave a fairly rallying speech before we left, and we got onto the bus, the small little Francie bus as we used to call it, and going through the supporters, and the big bus was coming behind us, and the big bus was full of directors and board members and wives, and all the fans were banging on the big bus, and nobody passed any heat of us at all going into this little thing. And it was probably the right way to do it. And we walked in the Lance Road. I mean, we'd been there the day before. I went up the night before, and we went over and had a walk around it the day before. And I think once we got into the dressing room, and we started coming around to ourselves a wee bit that, we're here, we have nothing to lose. We believed we could win. And as it was, once all the real stuff was finished, with about 5-6 minutes to go, we were brought out into the tunnel. And I always remember Derry City, and I spoke to the Derry lads because I had the privilege of playing with a lot of them a couple of years later. Like, they came out, they were singing a song that Celtic sing, On the Road Again, and singing this in the tunnel. And I think we just went bananas. Like, myself and Jerry Kerr were looking for fights there and then, and Hasty was going crazy. And I think that sort of helped us so he was that, for anybody watch the game, we had a wee bit of luck. You need a bit of luck, and I think Willie McStay that day playing right full, and Mark McDonald, who's in my opinion a legend. He was great to it. Not only great to us on the pitch, but he's a wee bit older than us and looked after us. Two of them for the first 20 minutes just kept us right, and we sort of grew into it. And I suppose the rest is history. Don't remember an awful lot afterwards, to be honest with you. I remember, I suppose one of the funny things was that the club had organised it. The Pavilion in Lansdowne Road is a bar for an aftermatch sort of gig. And I remember sitting there with Declan Boyle and his girlfriend at the time, and Siobhan, my wife, and everybody had left. Everybody left it. We didn't know where the cup was. We didn't have a clue where anything was. And it was the loveliest 3/4 of an hour we had, that we just had a couple of pints ourselves, because we knew Bedlam was about to start happening. And by God, Bedlam did happen for a while.
Is there a certain amount of, I hear people talk about Glasgow and Newcastle when it comes to football as real fish bowls and pressure. You were a young lad, or you were a man, being a local lad, going as the captain of Sligo Rovers up to try and take the cup final home. Was there an added pressure on you? Did you feel maybe there was an added pressure on you and your family, or was it just another game?
No, there was a pressure. I think it was a pressure. Forget about anything. Any local that goes out on the pitch out there is under more pressure than anybody else. And people don't realise that to play for your local club is a huge honour, but it also can be fairly damaging. And I was lucky; it worked out well for me. Now maybe that's because I was thick, that no matter what people said, didn't bother me anyway. But a lot of local lads, get a wee bit of stick. I've seen English lads come here and been really poor players, but people loved them. And a local fella, as we know, I could name up loads of them as you could, played a handful of games and then wilted under the pressure of it. And it's different back then. Like, we used to play on a Saturday night. Like I said, we went out every Saturday night. That was the way it was. Win, lose or draw, we were out. We didn't lose that often. And you were in work on a Monday. And you met the people who went to the games through the week. And people at Sligo were quick enough to tell you you're useless. Let me tell you that. Even when you were good, you were useless to a lot of them. So, you just hardened up to it and you got used to it. I suppose that year, the experience we probably had, that we'd already won the league and we'd already won the Shield, helped a lot of the lads and helped me as captain as well. And, it was funny. My father was chairman, at the time as well, which for a lot of people it wouldn't have worked for. For me, it didn't really bother me. You know, people would always say to me, "Oh, your that's why you're playing." You know, my father couldn't kick snow over a rope and be the first one to say it, but he was a very, very good chairman. You know, and he set up the lot. There's a lot of things that he set up at the time that's still going on at the club. And yeah, it was a great family day, but it was just great for the people of Sligo and to be able to go up those steps and lift the cup. And I came down, and the first person I met, I remember, before we went up I remember doing something. I remember I went to Siobhan in the crowd before I went over to lift the cup and shared a moment with her, because I think the two of us found the whole thing surreal. And we knew our lives was going to change, you know, after that. And then I went over and met my mother and my father, and but everybody. But one of the moments was I have a very good friend, Jerry Sweeney, who was working in Dublin at the time, and I remember coming down the steps of the cup, and I remember he was fighting to get in front of me, and to see somebody that I played with, grew up with, dear, so happy. You know, it always sort of engaged me. God, this means so much. You know.
And I suppose it wasn't just I actually remember something you said to me when you were coaching me years ago. We didn't win the match in the end, so it didn't actually work. But it doesn't matter.
My career is where it is.
But I remember a lot of what you told me, and you did say that when you're involved with a group of players, even if you don't get on with them, if you win a competition or you win a cup with a group of players, you'll always have that bond. Mm-hmm. Would you still chat to many of the '94 team? Or?
Yeah, we chat. Like, we were lucky enough we all got together. Club got us all together this year for 25 years. But yeah, and I would say I've been relegated a few times. None of that team talks. Okay. I've lucky enough to win leagues and won cups and everything else. We all stay in contact, and there's always something about it. Nobody wants to be around failure, you know. But that's quite on. Everybody wants to be around success, and I think combinations were right. McStay was ahead of his time when he came here. You know, he brought so much professionalism to it, and it was ironic because there was about 6 or 7 pros, but the part-time lads were fit. Mark McDonald, you know, I'll always give him, and he's not there. Ian Lynch was a huge part of that squad that year, and like, he didn't make the cup final squad, you know, but he was fantastic anytime he was called on, you know. So he was a great local. Pierce Devaney was a local, you know. There was Trevor Scanlon was involved. It was great to have local lads involved, and there were some of the younger lads. It was great. It was great times. Just hard to imagine it's that long ago.
If you were to pinpoint, I suppose, looking back at some of the players there's some unbelievable players. Obviously, I just remember watching it on tape. If you had to pinpoint maybe one or two of the key players, not just on the day, but over maybe the course of a couple of seasons that were maybe just a step ahead, or just the real top players there, who would you single out? Or would you just say you won so much together, it really was a squad effort? Is there one that...
Yeah, it was a squad effort, but I think, you know, Eddie Annan was tremendous. Really, really, really talented boy. And he came the year before on loan in Willie's first year. And I remember he struggled for the first 6 games. He really, really struggled. He was very fragile. He was getting lumps kicked out of the League of Ireland, and he went back. And I was a wee bit surprised he came back. But he was so talented. Hasty had an engine that he could go forever. Declan Boyle was a Rolls Royce beside me. You know, he made things look so simple. You know, I'd be going trying to head it, and he'd be taking it on his chest. And I'd be having panic attacks like him. You know, McStay was his experience. Mark McDonald has won 2 league medals. You know, he'd done it twice. You know, the first 2 times Sligo won the cup, he's in the team. What an achievement that is. And you know, all around it. Carey came as a centre half. I think he played in every position, you know, and he was great in the middle of the pitch when he played for us. You know, besides the goal, you know, his physicality, you know, he intimidated people, he got around people. You know, Ger Houlihan wasn't in the squad that day. He was playing for Armagh, and again, he was such a big guy. You know, we had 2 absolute flyers of wingers in Johnny Kenny and Pádraig Moore. I mean, you know, absolute nightmare for fullbacks. Just solid pace, you know. And back then, I think it was going into an era where pace was so important in the game, you know. And I think we looked at a team that was very good going forward, pretty solid at the back, you know. And you know, Glider might have been the best goalkeeper in the world, you know, but that day he made a save, you know, towards the end of it that kept us in the game. And we always say that it hit him because he didn't have the ability to save it; it just bounced off him. You know? He was a great character, but again, it just came together for us at a season when, you know, and people say about the lights and turn on the lights. Yeah, it probably helped, but it was always there. We just believed it couldn't be beaten.
So you'd probably stay out of the three wins that in that year to the cup final is obviously the creme de la creme.
Yeah, the cup final was the creme de la creme. But I remember the Shield game here. We played Waterford. I think we won 1-0 down there, and we came back here and played Waterford, and we were brutal on the night. It was a 0-0, and we were blessed to get away with it. But we sort of grinded out a result, and we had some scary moments. Waterford had a very, very decent team at the time. Brendan Ormsby, I remember, was playing centre half for them. He played with Aston Villa and was a really, really hard guy. And I remember picking him up from corner kicks, and I still have the bruises, I think, from it. But it's sort of, we learnt. As you went along, you learnt. And I suppose I was lucky enough to play in cup finals after that. It's funny, I've lost 2 of them. The one I wanted to win, actually, was the most important one, was this. But I remember the experience I had was never the same. When I went with a Finn Harps team into cup finals, we played in 3 games. The time was replays. You never had the same feeling. Your local team was special.
You say you never have the same feeling. I've chatted to a couple of people the last few weeks. You're a local lad. You've won the cup. You've won the Shield. You've won this. You've won that. Knowing you personally, I probably know the answer you're going to give. But is it hard then to motivate yourself the following season? You've won it all. You're going onto the pitch the next season. You're the boy about. You're the man of the town. You've just captained your hometown club to the FAI Cup for the first time in, I think it was over a decade since they had won it. How do you then top it next year?
There's a reality that comes into it. I had to go back to work.
Okay.
I was working in Steeple at the time, and they were really, really good to me. I think I took the week off, and I think it was fairly bad shape going into work the following week as well, because it was non-stop party. And we got back into work, and all of a sudden, your life clicks in. I think the ambition was then, of course, the next season we were promoted. We were up to big boys, and I think that was really good. We also had European football to look forward to, and I remember, playing in Europe. It was huge. We won. People don't give Sligo Rovers the respect. I mean, we won in Europe back then the following year. We bet Floriana over 2 legs. Now there's a huge hype of Irish clubs beat anybody. We were a bunch of part-timers going out to Malta, and we won. We actually drew out here and bet them here. And then we played Belgium World Cups there, again, we had some good stories over that. We had a 2-1 here, and we gave them the fright of their lives, and they gave us an absolute exhibition. I think it's the only game of football I said to somebody, in the 90 minutes of football over in Bruges, I don't think I headed the ball once. I don't think the ball was left the ground.
Which was rare for yourself.
Well, that was me lost. That was me. All I done was run around trying to kick people, because they just brought it to a totally different level. And I remember the centre forward I had at the time, they were after paying 4.1 million for him from PSV Eindhoven. And I was going back working in Steeple, on a Thursday morning after coming back from Europe. So you're brought back to earth fairly quickly, and you don't need to get carried away, because one thing this town is very good at is, they'll build you up and they'll be all great, but they ain't bad at slapping you down very quickly when you need to have it.
Okay, well, not everyone has been fortunate enough to be in a Sligo Rovers dressing room before a big game. I was mascot for I think it was the Cup semi-final or a League Cup semi-final against Shells in 95 or 96, I think it was. So we're just going to go down to the change rooms and we'll have a little chat about that, all right?
Yeah, no problem.
No, so we're here in a nice new Sligo Rovers dressing room, Gavin. When you were playing back in the 90s and that would have been situated, I suppose, when you come in the gate, maybe just to the right, there was the old mesh tunnel coming out to the shed. Things have certainly changed facilities-wise and that for the better since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a privilege to go into the showgrounds now and see the work that has gone on at it's the best ground in the country, that we built all ourselves. We didn't have the luxury of Tala Stadium. The DOs get away with Shamrock Rovers and that they get huge inputs of money from everybody. But back then there was 2 very, very small dressing rooms. The toilet was outside, so it was quite ironic. I suppose you used to meet the guy maybe you were marking in the toilet beforehand and that sort of a way. But good times. The famous shed was always there. That's where the supporters used to go, the singing supporters, and you used to just run out. I often spoke to players afterwards. They always found the shed intimidating when they came here. Because it was so loud and so bouncy. And in '94, the year that we were having, it was full to the brim. So it changed times.
In terms of change room and players and personalities, what is it that you think makes a successful changing room?
Winning, I suppose, is probably one of the most obvious things. Everybody likes to go into a winning dressing room, and when you're on a roll, it couldn't be better. the dressing room manages itself. It's an environment you create. You know, it's where the players have to be comfortable. The coaching staff and the manager don't do a lot in it. You know, they do a lot of their work done on match day. And like I said, players are huge superstitious. You know.
Had you any?
Yeah, I would have had. I used to always have a barrel. I used to eat. It's funny, you know. Players now have pasta and chicken and things like that, and we used to play at night. I wouldn't eat. I needed to feel empty. I'd have a bar of chocolate, plain bar of chocolate, and he was always buy a lottery ticket, you know, on the way down the road as well. I think it was a kill time more than it. And I always had to be first in the dressing room. And now there was mandatory madness in that because I used to come down first, and I used to always meet the referees first. And I'd go up and have a chat with them. And funny enough, that used to get me away maybe with the first tackle early or something like that. So that was my madness behind it. And players have different things going on. They'd sit in the same places, you know, the same fella would sit beside them. When you go to away grounds, they sit in the same place. If they won, they might change, you know, the opposite things. So, yeah.
Is there any other players you've seen over the years that had, or I suppose what's the strangest one you've seen?
I remember when I started off in the second year here, Billy Hamilton, Northern Ireland International came, and Billy was a huge man, like he was 6'4" and had played in England, played in the World Cups, and we were all in awe of him. He was a great character, but he never done a warm-up. He never went out for the warm-up. And I remember he never wore shin pads. The socks used to be rolled down, and when UEFA brought in the rule about the shin pads, we were all slagging Billy, how's this going to work? And I remember it was on a Sunday, he produced a letter for the referee from the doctor saying that it stopped the circulation or something. So he got away with it. And he was one of the strangest ones, never done a warm-up. And again, you know, the great Joseph Indo was in here, you know, he had his own routine, but his routine would have started maybe at 7 o'clock the morning of a match, and he was very much guided along what he done. But when he went out the door, he was ready to go. So, you know, me myself, I was going around thumping walls and thumping in the booth, trying to get myself going. But people have different ways of doing things. Now, a lot of them sit and listen to music, and they find that very good. Not for me, but...
I suppose when I knew we were going to do it today, I brought a little present along. A present that was given to me. I suppose I would have looked up to you as a child, seeing you being brought every week by my dad to watch you. I was mascot in 90, I think it was 95, 96, we played Shells. It was a bad day, a bad game. I remember my memories of it are probably my best childhood memories that I have. I remember coming out in front of the shed and hitting 3 penalties on. I think Mark McLean was still there at the time, I couldn't tell you. He saved the first 2, he let the third in, and I never heard a cheer like it. Mike Small came up behind me, he tapped me on the back on the halfway line. And I ran away crying. I ran away looking for my father. I was just absolutely terrified. But also something that you gave to me when I was younger was this, and I'd say you gave me this. When I say I was about 3 or 4, I'd hold it up for the camera for any of the die-hard Sligo Rovers fans watching. Torn EMI, is that what it says in the front?
Yeah, Torn EMI were a sponsor, right?
You can actually still see the muck stains on the back. So he definitely got involved in the game in there, but sorry Gav, Torn EMI, yeah.
They were, again, a company, Michael Layton, who went on to be a director here for a while, and he was involved in Torn EMI, and they sponsors after the Great Four Lanterns used to sponsor us when I came in first. The game you mentioned was a semi-final against Shelburne at the time, an FAI Cup semi-final that we lost that day. Partially down to my own mistake. I remember there was a long kick out, Finney Erkins was playing centre forward, and I don't miss many in the year, and I totally misjudged it, and I knew the minute I missed it, it was a goal. And he scored. I think we had a player sent off early on in the game, and Laurie Sanchez was the manager. I remember he took off Eddie Annett, which I remember we'd arguments, me and him afterwards as well. You know, I thought we'd get to a cup final every year. You know, we didn't. It was ridiculous to even think that way. Hugely disappointing, but I suppose your memories of it, you weren't the first person that was intimidated by Mike Small, and you won't be the last. He was another great character when he came here, and big, strong, physical guy, but really nice guy off the pitch, you know, and brought an awful lot to the dressing room in his own way.
And as I said, we came here today to talk about football, so I think we won't do it on the pitch, will we?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so it's a lovely Sunday morning, as you can see around here. The showground's looking unreal. Gavin, as you walked out the tunnel there and onto the pitch, does it take you back? Would you like 10 more minutes?
Oh, 10 more minutes, 10 more seconds, we'd love to be able to play. I suppose just look at the facilities. and look at the pitch and the shape that it's in. It was in good shape back then. Lord of Mercy and great Andy Tiernan used to do a great job on it. But now it's just pristine. There's no excuse. I probably wouldn't survive on a pitch like this, to be honest with you, because I was always looking for a bobble and the benefit of the doubt, because passing was never my strength. So but it looks really, really great.
They do say, Gav, that retirement is especially hard for a footballer. Is there anything in life that you can get that buzz back, running out in front of full showgrounds, thousands of people, to talk about it during the week, the build up, the afters, but just the game, the buzz of the actual game? Is there anything that can compare to it?
No, it's a straight answer. And I was lucky enough, I played for a long time, and it's all about playing. Management, coaching, not the same. It's not the same, and it goes so fast. And I think you take things for granted. I know a lot of players. I was lucky. I played for a long time, way over 20 years. But I know a lot of players, ended their careers in injury and struggled with a lot of things in life afterwards. So difficult to struggle myself, I have to say, when I finished and I knew I couldn't play anymore. It takes a huge adaptation, because it's been a huge part of your life and a huge part of your family's life.
Is there any memory, particularly just on this pitch that we're standing on now, that stands out at you? Maybe when you walk out, is there one thing you can pick out, be it good, be it bad, that just stands out?
Did the cup semi-final. A lot of things. We played Limerick in the cup semi-final, an evening game here, and it was really, really tight. Limerick were bottom of the Premier Division, and we were top of the First Division, and it was a really, really tight game. There was a couple of lads that used to play with Sligo that I played with, playing with Limerick, and we won 1-0 in the end and scored. And I remember the whole place went absolutely crazy. And I think after the game, you realise you were going to a cup final. It's a game that not a lot of people talk about, but for me, because I'd lost a lot of semi-finals, it was huge to actually get to a final. So yeah, that one sticks out a lot. Memories of coming back here. I remember coming back here at Christmas. It was the winter season. It was the first time back in the showgrounds, and there was a huge crowd, and there was a huge build-up to the game. And I suppose I'd done the same routine as what I used to do as a Sligo player. I got up, came down, went into the local shop across the road, got a bar of chocolate, got a lottery ticket, got a load of stick from Rovers fans that were standing outside the Tudor or Mooney's, or what it used to be. Came into the dressing room, and we won 1-0, and I probably had one of my best games for Derry that night.
Talk to me about the last time you stepped on a football pitch as a professional footballer. Did you know that was your last game, or was it by injury or by suspension, or can you remember where it was?
It was by injury.
Okay.
I was playing for Kildare County against Limerick down in Limerick. It was on a horrible Sunday afternoon, and I was lucky. My father came with me to the game. Drove down, played. I went up to head a ball, and as I was just about to head it, I got a nudge, and I landed very awkwardly, and I shattered my disc in my back, totally ruptured it. And I remember I couldn't drive back. My father drove the car back, and they wanted to operate me back, and I said no, because I said there was a chance that I might have paralysis out of it. And that hurt me, because I knew it was finished. I was finished anyway. I suppose that season, I remember I was at Kildare with Dermot Keeley, and we used to go around playing. But I remember I gave 4 penalty kicks away. I started off the season great. I got one player of the month for the first 2 months, and after that, this whole thing happened. And I hear players saying that your legs go. And I remember we were playing in Cove, and there was a fellow called Bruton playing centre forward, and he was quick. But I had about 10 yards on him, and there was a ball knocked over the top, and he went back by me as if I wasn't moving, as if it was a quicksand. And I took him down, it was a penalty. And I think I gave away 4 penalties in a row in the next 4 games. So I think it was lucky that Limerick thing probably happened, because we'd have got relegated out of the First Division, never mind anything else. But the legs just totally went for that level. And I remember I went to the gym. I was never a great gym lover, and the doctor at the time said, look, you need to build your muscles and build your core and all that sort of stuff. And so I done all that, and I went back playing with Abbey United junior wise here, and then I went and played with Castlebar, and like I said, played Night Owls after that, and played up until I was well in my 40s. There's nothing better than going on a football pitch, knowing you're fit, knowing you're at it, knowing you're well able to deal with whatever's thrown at you. When you're going out, you know you're not fit, when you know you're not. And I suppose I came into a dressing room at Sligo where there was an awful lot of players like me finishing up at the time, and we were bottom of the table, and there was a lot of lads from Dublin who were down here for a check more than anything else. And I remember looking at the condition of some of them and things like that, and I said to myself, if I ever get like that, so I suppose the injury helped me before that actually happened, that somebody had to retire me. I retired myself.
So it was Gavin Dykes, captain of '94 league winner with Derry, you'd been there, you'd done it all. The natural progression was to head over there to the dugout. So I think we'd finish up there for today, Gav, will we?
Yeah, okay, man.
And we'll go over. Gavin, the natural progression for you as a captain all your career was naturally to come into the dugout. Now I know you're the manager of the Sligo Community Centre, so I know a lot of footballers have a reputation of maybe not being the brightest. I know from over the years with yourself that's not true. Some might question that. Some might question that statement. Yeah. But if you didn't play football, you didn't get into the showgrounds that time, what do you think you'd be doing now?
Don't know, Mark. I suppose I didn't realise how important education was until it was too late, probably in life for me. All I wanted to do was play football and that sort of way. I was lucky I got opportunities in jobs that I could go and educate myself again. And I'm still at that, doing things like that at the moment. Football management was something. Was I interested in going into it? I sort of fell into it. Finn Harps had sacked Charlie McGeever. They asked me would I take temporary charge, and I sort of roller coasted from that. I was too young for it at the time. I was a player manager. I thought I could change the world. I quickly realised that wasn't going to happen. I left here as manager of them, and then I ended up back at Derry as assistant manager of Dermot Keeley. And Derry were not in a good place. That didn't last very long. Dermot left. We always have. He feels I should have went with him. I said no, I couldn't go. Derry would have been relegated if I left. I stayed on. History will show we kept Derry up. The following year, I stayed here, done a full season. We done okay. But it was a full-time job, and I was doing it part-time. I was still working. You know, I'd huge people who asked me, you know, why didn't you go full-time at the time? I could see there was no future in full-time football. You know, especially in management. So you lose 3 games, you're sacked. You know, so no, I didn't. You need to have a wee bit wiser and a wee bit cuter than that, which I thought I was. You know, by keeping a job, I always wanted to do better that way, educational-wise as well. And thankfully, that worked out really well for me. You know, I left Derry. You know, and was at Newry as well. Went up and started doing my coaching badges, and I done all my coach badge with IFA, which people found strange, but
that's the Northern Irish Association.
Northern Ireland Association. The FEI didn't do coaching badges back then. You know, they were doing some stuff and not elite stuff, and I done my A license with the IFA. I met some great characters up there, and after playing up there, I really, really enjoyed it. It was a wee bit throwback to the old times. Saturday 3 o'clock, and it's still Saturday 3 o'clock that they play. It's based on the English module. You got away with stuff up there as well, but you didn't get away with down here. It was changing down here a wee bit. And I really, really enjoyed it and learnt an awful lot from it. I completed my pro license, you know, 2 years ago. Still involved in the game, still involved coaching wise. You know, spent a very successful time back here. When it came back as head of youth development, and you know, was honoured to come back and do that, and felt they played a huge part in the structure that now is in it, and also some of the players that have played, you know, through it, that came through that ranks have done really, really well. I suppose I was lucky enough, in my opinion, to meet somebody who made a huge impression. Be part of the coaching staff here that we won the league in 2012 and won the cup in 2013 as Atlantic Cup. Learned an awful lot from him, but he also learned an awful lot from us. I think, you know, he'd always say that.
And I remember towards the end of Paul Cook leaving, Barra coming in. Do you think he gets the credit he deserves? Because you hear the statement that was Paul Cook's team won this, Paul Cook's team won that. Paul Cook wasn't here when Sligo Rovers lifted the trophy, and I just don't think Barra ever got the credit he deserved.
I got quite annoyed about that, to be honest with you. He came in the night before, a couple of days before we played Shelburne in the first league game. Cookie done a great job here. Don't be wrong, Cookie was Cookie. You know, that's the way he was. Done a fantastic job. He's been very successful at clubs in England. Barraclough's a different character. I remember I had to meet him in the Clarion Hotel, and we spoke about things 3 hours of everything. He wanted an in-depth look at the players, about all of them. He didn't know them, but he got to know them really, really fast. And his attention to detail with things, and his attention with how he wanted to train was at a totally different level. And he's gone on to prove it. Like, he won the league. He won the league. It wasn't Paul Cook's thing. It was Ian Barraclough's thing. He won the cup the following year. He won the Satanta Cup the following year. And it still sticks in my throat. He was sacked. It doesn't just make sense to me. He was sacked. He's gone on since. He was very successful with clubs in England. He's under 20 Northern Ireland under 21 manager. He took them from never winning a game to beating Spain, the European champions, and he has a good record of that. And by all means, it looks like he could be the next Northern Ireland international manager. And for him, to go on that journey goes to show, and he still I'll keep in contact with him regularly. Is not only on the pitch was he good for the club, but off the pitch, the way he carried himself, and he brought Gary Stevens in with him, really, really two very professional guys who I think, it'll show since they left. It's no coincidence our results have struggled with it.
I think you can see from Sligo over the last few years, particularly a lot of the players that came, and we talk about the golden era. You look at Joseph, he's settled in Riverstown. People that come to Sligo and they do well. It's a nice place to live when people like you. And it's a nice county, and do you know what? You can see today the weather, the sun is shining, the showgrounds is looking well. There's no nicer place in the world than Sligo when the sun is shining. But how are we going to get the good times back? And is it a sense that at the time we were full-time, I know we're full-time now, but other clubs weren't? Was it easier to attract the bigger players back then than it will be now for the next few years?
It's always difficult to attract players.
And is that a Dublin thing?
It's a money thing.
Okay.
You could have a player who wants to go to be in Dublin, and for him to come down to Sligo, there's an extra cost he has to be put up. There's rent. He'll want more money for coming down here, and it's a problem that way. I also think that the model now has totally changed. We're a community club. The money is raised, like the point I was making at the start. Fans raise the money, and you raised nearly 500,000 last year alone outside the gates. No other club in the country could do it, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Dundalk now have private investors. Shamrock Rovers have private investors. They've gone way ahead. They can buy the best players. They can have the best facilities. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult to get back to where we were. I think it'll take a long, long time. I think the structure of the club would probably need to change. There'd probably need to be an AGM. Like, if somebody walked in the door at the moment and wanted to invest money in the club, I don't know if the structure is allowed, if they're allowed to do that. But I think that's the way it's going. If you look at England, it's all owners now.
Yeah.
The big clubs are all owned by very rich people, and I think that's coming. It's in Ireland. Cork, ourselves, Finn Harps are the bottom teams at the bottom of the table at the moment. There's a clear, obvious reason why. It's money, and I think if you look at the top table at the moment, Derry have a huge investor in their chairman. Dundalk have, Shams have, Pats have. Waterford did have. I think that's gone a bit pear-shaped on them. But it's a money-driven game. The best players will come, but the best players will come for money. And something that you're saying about players coming here and settling, Chris Rutherford, Tony Stenson, Paul Fielding, Gary Humes. There's a history of players coming here. But it was always, I go back to the point, and I have no problems, it was always good for outsiders to come here. They didn't get as much stick as the local did.
Yeah.
There's local players. Alan Cawley is probably one of the most famous ones that never played for here. It's a discussion. Harry was his uncle. The single stick Harry, his uncle, got towards the end of his career, and he was a great guy. So it's always been difficult for locals here. I think it's going to become more difficult until people realise that when you pay the money in the gate, you're there to support your team. And if somebody's having a bad game, they're not doing it deliberately. If somebody isn't good enough, grand, that's a different matter. But that's down to the manager picking him. But if somebody's out there doing their best, and if he's a local, I'd always say, give him a break. The Dublin fella or that, the local will always give you a wee bit more. Maybe not in skill, but he'll always give you that wee bit more. I think history will show that we miss so many local talents. I'll always mention every interview I do. Like Glenn Shannon was probably one of the most talented footballers that ever came in here and lost his way. Will admit afterwards, and was probably, I'll always say, he was unlucky. He was unlucky because I wasn't here. I'd left the year before. If I was here, I think he could have went on to good things because I'd have been able to handle him a wee bit better than what other people tried to.
I actually spoke to Alan Cawley a couple of weeks ago, and at the end of the interview I asked him kind of like a joking question, but to get a serious answer, I said if the ball dropped in the last minute of a cup final and he had a choice between, I think I gave him Jason Byrne or Glenn Crowe, Alan Shearer or Glenn Shannon, how would he like it to fall to? And he said Glenn Shannon, and he just said, you know, he spoke how highly he actually spoke of him, of how good he was as a player, and probably one of the best that came from the town, but just didn't have the career that.
Well, he didn't have the career, but I think a lot of people didn't help him, and there was nobody, I suppose, senior-wise in here as a player to sort of help him and guide him and tell him he shouldn't be going where he was going, and he had to look after his diet and he had to do that. Now, I think I remember playing against him. I was playing at Harps, and he played for Sligo against us, and like he was a hell of a talent. He really, really was, you know. And I remember after the game, you know, saying to him, "You have a chance. You should get yourself in better shape. You should take it more serious and things like that." But he needed somebody to sort of go about it, and I'd always say, Liam Coyle will always say, for me, he was the best ever, you know. But he was lucky because he had plenty of good people around him, you know, to sort of keep him on the straight and narrow, that he didn't like go out too much, that he did look after his body, that he did sort of do those things, you know. And I think Glenn was just unfortunate that at that era maybe some of the older stock was gone.
I know you spoke before, and you said that you did like coaching, kind of under 15, under 16, under 17 to a certain age because they listen. I suppose we'll finish on this because it's a glorious day and we're going to go and hit a few golf balls or something, but if you had a bit of advice for any young lad for all over the country, but particularly from Sligo, Summerhill College, whatever school they might be in, that maybe has a chance, what would you say to them now, 14, 15, 16 years of age?
I suppose don't look back and have regrets. You know, people say about Ronaldo, and I'll give Ronaldo as a prime example, alright? Ronaldo is, in my opinion, probably the best purposely made footballer in the world because he worked the hardest at it. I knew I had to work hard. Like I said, I grew up with an elite bunch of friends who were way better footballers than I was. Way better. But I made huge sacrifices off the pitch. I missed christenings, I missed weddings, I missed parties. I missed everything that I had to do because I had to be the best I could possibly be with the limited ability that I had. And I worked really, really hard. I stayed behind in training all the time. People used to say you were great in the air. That wasn't from just going out and making it happen. I used to have more footballs than anybody else in training afterwards. Nicky Bruges used to come and he used to kick. I used to come stay there and kick balls out. And he used to say, "I'm going mad because I want to go home." And I said, "No, do another few." But you need to have that determination in you to be the best you can do. Because when you go out on a football pitch, there's no hiding place. There is absolutely no place you can hide. You know, you can't just say I'm having an off day. You know, you need to be at your best. So I would say practice. You know, practice. You know, there's a famous saying, you know, you can be lucky, you know, but I found that the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Well, that's a nice note to finish on. Gavin, we're not allowed to shake hands, of course. I can't thank you enough for giving up your time today on what's a glorious day in a glorious setting. I appreciate it so much. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you again soon, Gav.
Cheers, thank you.
Now folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Last Man Back. None of these episodes would be possible at all without our sponsors of the local businesses from around the town. Some of these businesses aren't even open at the minute due to the restrictions of COVID-19. Today's episode with Gavin Dykes was very kindly sponsored by Enda Scanlon and Fergal Harrison of Fiddler's Creek. So when they're back open, make sure you head down, give them the twist, in for a pint and a bit of grub. Cheers folks.
Go!